Good morning. This is Friday morning, and this is our thought for today as you prepare for the weekend. As I did last week, I really want to encourage you to think about coming back to church, being part of what's going on, whether you belong to Killinchy Presbyterian Church or another church and you maybe haven't gone back yet. It really is time to come back to church. We need to get people back together again. We need to move forward. We need to be thinking about what lies ahead of us, and we can't do that if we're not together. And I'm certain whoever you are missed, and we would love to see you back at church. So this is Friday morning. You've got another day to get things in order and get ready to come to church. Things are safe and we're doing things well, and you've no reason, in a sense, not to come to church, other than the fact that maybe you've allowed yourself to become a little bit too comfortable not being at church on the Lord's Day. I want to encourage you, please, to put this in your diary, church Sunday morning. Let's get back together again. We're looking at this passage from Mark chapter 8, verses 1 to 10, Jesus feeding the 4,000 this week. And this is a passage which I've grown to love as I've thought about it more and more, simply because I've taken it as a separate passage, almost as if the feeding of the 5,000 in chapter 6 didn't happen. And because we do that, we get a blessing from it. But really this morning, what we're looking at occurs in both passages. There's this one phrase that we find at the end of the feeding of the 5,000, as well as the end of the feeding of the 4,000. The reason that they both appear there is not a reason to argue that it's the same event, that it's the same thing, that Mark's just somehow forgotten one event and put both in and got his facts all mixed up, etc., etc. No, that's not what's happened at all, I believe. But there's this wonderful line, which I believe would have happened if it had been 10 accounts of Jesus feeding thousands of people. And this one line is found really towards the end of our passage this morning. We read in verse 8, this is after Jesus has taken the bread and broken it and given it to the people, after blessing it, giving thanks for it. They then are sitting on the ground, and food comes to them and they eat. Now, the temptation is to think that, Jesus takes this bread and he breaks it up, and you can only break up so much bread, and after you've broken it up, there's not going to be an awful lot of people getting an awful lot of things. It's like that pizza that comes in to a youth meeting, and they start cutting out the slices of pizza, and when they count all the people there and they keep cutting, everybody's looking at the pizza thinking, my slice is getting smaller and smaller and smaller because there's so many people here. This one pizza, we should have ordered 2 pizzas, because if we'd ordered 2, I'd have got a bit more pizza to eat. This idea of having to divide what there is means that you're going to get less of what there is. And so that this is a human thought, that the more we divide what we have, the less we get for ourselves, but the more people receive a little. But here in Jesus dividing the food out, what seems to have been happening is, as he's dividing the food, as he's serving the food to the disciples to then serve to the people, the food just keeps coming. There doesn't seem to be an end to the food. Jesus has given them not just, a little tiny piece of food, the size of a piece of bread that we would take at communion, or a small little cup of wine. Jesus has given them something to eat, and that's something which they're going to eat, and it's going to not just give them take the edge of their appetite, enough to see them safely home again, but more than that, this food that Jesus has given them has not just fed them, but given them too much to eat. Now, you could argue that's very wasteful of Jesus to give them so much food that there's leftovers, and we thought about the leftovers when we looked at the passage in Mark chapter 6 of the feeding of the 5,000. But Jesus is basically saying, I'm going to make sure that they all have enough to eat. Now, we could argue Jesus knows everything about us. Jesus knows how much we can eat. Jesus knows how much we would eat, even if we're maybe feeling slightly greedy, or maybe we were making sure that we were stocking up enough food because it's a long journey home. Jesus has given them enough and more than enough, because there's this wonderful sense that with Jesus, he's given us that overflowing. My cup overflows at the end of Psalm 23. Jesus doesn't say, I will give you just enough. But Jesus gives himself to us overflowing, pressed down and overflowing. This idea of an abundance with the Lord. And we're not just thinking about the issue of food here, but we're thinking about Jesus giving himself to us. Jesus doesn't just give us a small portion of himself for every day of life, just to get us through from the start of the day to the end of the day. He doesn't give us enough of himself so that by the time we get to, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, we're running really low on the grace that we need from Jesus. But that grace overflows from the Lord every moment of every day, so that our lives are drenched and saturated with the grace of Jesus Christ in our lives. How amazing is that? That Jesus gives us an overabundance of himself. He gave these people so much that they, after 3 days, could eat as much as they want, and still there were leftovers from 7 loaves and a few fish. Jesus, it wasn't magic. It was Jesus providing for his loved ones, the people he had compassion on. And I want you to marvel in the fact that Jesus gives us so much of himself. Sometimes we are satisfied with a very little of it. Sometimes we think, well, that's all I need. I'll be fine. I can cope on my own. I can get through this. And Jesus said, look, there's a reservoir of my grace and my mercy and my love for you. And I would love just to pour it all out on top of your life, so that you would know me in the abundance of knowing me. And this wonderful blessing. Sometimes we're satisfied with a thimble full, when Christ wants to give us just this overwhelming drenching of himself. It goes back to that quote, if you remember the other day, I quoted Spurgeon about, we want so little of Jesus compared to how much he wants of us. He wants so much more of us. He wants to give us so much more. And yet we allow ourselves to be satisfied with just taking a little and thinking, well, that's all I need. I'm okay on my own. Friends, come to church on Sunday. Come to meet with God's people. Come to worship him in song and praise and prayer. Come and be saturated with the grace and the knowledge and the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ. I would love to see you come back. I would love to see new faces come to church. I leave it with you. But it's time we get back together again. It's time we got as much of Jesus Christ as we feel we can take, and then get more and more from him, because he's there for us every moment of every day. He wants to give us so much more, to satisfy us beyond our realizing how satisfied we could ever be. So be encouraged this Friday. Have a great weekend. I hope you're blessed over the weekend and you get time to spend with your loved ones, time to relax, time to unwind, time to just recharge yourself for whatever lies ahead next week. Thanks for being with me this week, and we'll hopefully see you again at the start of next week. In the meantime, God bless.